My name is Claire Bennett, and I'm 36 years old. For 9 years, my parents told everyone I was in prison. Not sick, not estranged, not we don't talk anymore. Prison. They said it so many times in so many rooms that even my own grandmother stopped sending me birthday cards because why would you write to a woman behind bars? I found out the truth of what they'd been saying 11 months ago, standing in a hospital hallway at 2 a.m. with blood on my scrubs, when my sister looked at me like she was seeing a ghost and whispered, "You're not supposed to be here. You're supposed to be locked up." Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where family secrets come to light and quiet people finally find their voice. Grab your coffee, get comfortable, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. If stories about hidden identities, family lies, and the moment the truth finally lands speak to you, drop a comment and subscribe, because this one starts on the worst night of my nephew's life and the best night of mine. I am a trauma and pediatric surgeon at a level 1 hospital in Denver. I did not become that by accident. I became that because 9 years ago, my family decided I was an embarrassment worth erasing, and instead of fighting them for a seat at their table, I built my own table in a city 3 states away, and I built it out of a scalpel and 11 years of school and residency that nobody in my family ever asked me a single question about. My name is Claire, and I have not seen my parents in person since I was 27 years old. What happened between us started small, the way rot always does. I grew up in a family that measured love by predictability. My older sister Megan married her high school boyfriend at 22, had a baby by 24, and settled 4 blocks from my parents' house in Ohio. And for that, she was the good one, the reliable one, the one who stayed. I left for college on a full scholarship at 18 and never really came back. Not because I didn't love my family, but because staying meant becoming smaller, and I have never once in my life been good at making myself small. My mother used to say it to my face, not unkindly, just factually, the way you'd mention the weather. "You always did think you were better than us, Claire." I wasn't better. I was just different. And in my family, different was a diagnosis nobody wanted to treat. The break came when I was 27, in my 3rd year of surgical residency, working 80-hour weeks and living on granola bars and 4 hours of sleep. My father called me on a Tuesday night, one of maybe 6 calls I got from him that entire year, and told me my grandmother, his mother, had left me her house in her will. Not because she loved me more than my sister, but because 11 years earlier, when I was 16 and broke and terrified, I had told my grandmother a secret nobody else in the family knew, that my father had a gambling problem so bad it had drained 2 of their retirement accounts, and that my mother knew and covered for him, and that the loan they'd taken from my college fund to cover a bad month had never once been paid back. My grandmother believed me. She was the only one who did, and when she died, she left me the one asset in the family that hadn't already been quietly bled dry. Specifically, in the will, in her own handwriting, to Claire, who never lied to me. My family's reaction was not grief, it was fury. My father accused me of manipulating a dying woman. My mother said I had poisoned my grandmother against them with stories that weren't true, even though every word of it was documented in bank statements I still have in a fireproof box in my closet. My sister Megan, who I later learned had been quietly borrowing money from our parents for years to cover her own struggling household, stopped speaking to me entirely. Because if I was telling the truth about our father, it meant the family she'd built her whole identity around wasn't what she'd been pretending it was. I sold the house. I used every dollar of it, plus every loan I could take out, to finish medical school debt-free enough to survive residency without collapsing. And somewhere in that year, while I was in an OR learning to close a chest cavity, my family decided on a story that was easier to tell their neighbors than the truth. The truth was ugly and complicated. A daughter who exposed a father's addiction, a mother who covered for it, a grandmother who believed the daughter over her own son. The story they told instead was simple, clean, and required no explanation. Claire went off the rails. Claire got into trouble. Claire's in prison. I didn't find out this was the story for almost 8 years. I was too busy building a life to notice the shape of the hole I'd left behind me. I found out because of Jason. My sister's son, my nephew, 9 years old, was in a car accident on a 2-lane highway outside Denver 11 months ago, on a family trip I didn't even know they were taking through my city. A drunk driver crossed the center line. Megan's husband was driving. He walked away with a broken collarbone. Megan had a concussion and a fractured wrist. Jason, in the back seat, had a lacerated spleen and internal bleeding severe enough that the paramedics called ahead for a trauma surgeon to be standing by the second they hit the ambulance bay doors. I was the trauma surgeon on call that night. I didn't know the name on the chart was my nephew until I was already scrubbing in, reading the intake sheet a resident had printed for me, and saw Jason Reyes, age 9, guardian, Megan Reyes, and felt my stomach drop through the floor of the OR. There was no time to process it as anything other than a patient. That's the strange mercy of my job. When someone is bleeding out in front of you, your body simply will not let you feel anything but the next necessary decision. I did not think about the birthday cards that stopped coming. I did not think about the word prison. I thought about pressure, about the spleen, about a 9-year-old boy whose blood pressure was dropping in a way that meant we had maybe 20 minutes before this stopped being a surgery and became a funeral. I operated on my nephew for 3 hours and 40 minutes. I remember the exact moment his numbers stabilized, the way the whole room seemed to exhale at once, the way a first-year resident next to me said, "Nice work, Dr. Bennett," like it was just another Tuesday, because to her, it was. To me, it was the first time in 9 years I had touched anyone in my family, even if he was unconscious and had no idea whose hands were inside him. I walked out of that OR at 2 a.m., still in my bloodied scrubs to update the family, because that's protocol. You tell them yourself, you don't send a resident. And there in the hallway, under those horrible fluorescent lights that make everyone look half dead, was my sister, one arm in a sling, mascara down her face, and my mother beside her, who I hadn't laid eyes on in 9 years, both of them staring at me like I was something that had crawled up out of the past. It was my mother who said it first, before I could even open my mouth to tell them Jason was going to live. She grabbed Megan's good arm and whispered, loud enough that I heard every word, "That's Claire. Oh my God, that's Claire. How is she out? I thought she was still..." And Megan finished it, staring at me with her mouth open. In prison. I stood there in blood-spattered scrubs, an ID badge clipped to my chest that said, "Dr. Claire Bennett, Trauma and Pediatric Surgery." And I understood in that single frozen second exactly what story had been told about me for 9 years to explain my absence to neighbors, to Megan's in-laws, probably to Jason himself. Not we had a falling out. Not she exposed something we didn't want exposed. Just, she's in prison, poor thing. We don't like to talk about it. I could have let the moment destroy me. Instead, something in me went very calm. The same calm I use when a chest is open and everyone in the room is waiting on me to make the next call. I looked at my mother and said, "Jason's spleen was lacerated and he was bleeding internally. We repaired it. He's stable, he's in recovery, and he is going to be fine." Then I looked at my sister, whose eyes had not left my badge, and I said, "You can see him in 20 minutes. And I turned and walked back through the double doors, because I had 2 more patients on the board that night, and because for the first time in 9 years, my family needed something from me that had nothing to do with money, and everything to do with the truth finally showing up in a hallway wearing scrubs and holding a chart. I didn't confront them that night. I didn't need to. The confrontation had already happened, silently, in the space between my mother's whispered, "How is she out?" and the badge on my chest that answered a question she never even had to ask out loud. Over the following weeks, while Jason recovered on my unit, under my direct care because I made sure of that, I watched my family's careful 9-year-old story collapse in real time under the weight of a hospital ID and a stack of medical degrees they'd never once asked to see. Megan came to me on day 3, alone, while Jason was napping, and asked the question I'd been waiting 9 years for someone in my family to ask. "Why did you let us think you were in prison?" And I told her the truth, calm, unhurried, the same voice I used to explain a diagnosis to a frightened parent. I didn't let them think anything. I simply stopped being available to correct a story I never knew existed, because nobody in that family had spoken to me in 9 years to tell me what story they were telling. I hadn't lied by omission. They had built an entire mythology out of my silence, and never once checked it against reality. Because checking it against reality would have meant admitting what actually happened, that a father gambled away a retirement fund, a mother covered it up, and a daughter who told the truth got erased for it instead. My mother never apologized. Not really. Not in the way that counts. The kind that names the specific harm instead of gesturing vaguely at misunderstandings. What she did instead, 3 weeks later, in a hallway outside Jason's room, was smaller and stranger and somehow more honest. She looked at my badge again, really looked at it this time, and said quietly, "We should have called you." Not, "I'm sorry we lied." Not, "I'm sorry for 9 years." Just, "We should have called you." I said, "Yes, you should have." And I let that be the whole conversation, because some debts don't get paid off in a hallway. They get paid off slowly, in showing up, in whether you call again. And 11 months later, my mother has called 4 times, and I have answered twice. And Megan and I are, carefully, cautiously, becoming people who text each other photos of Jason's recovery, instead of strangers who share a surname. I never got an apology big enough to match 9 years of "she's in prison." What I got instead was better, in its own strange way. Proof, undeniable and written in a hospital chart with my own signature on it, that the daughter they buried under a lie was the one standing over the operating table when it mattered most. And if you've ever been erased by your own family's version of events, if you've ever found out the story they told about you was easier for them than the truth, I want to hear it. Tell me in the comments what finally exposed the real story in your family. And if this kind of quiet reckoning is why you're here, subscribe, because there are more stories like this one coming, about people who stopped explaining themselves and just let the truth arrive on its own time.